Older homes. What do you top 3 or 4 or 5 things that people need to be aware of just in older homes that you see all the time on inspection that maybe you have an opinion on? That's
older homes. I think what's most important for me is always the electrical.
Okay.
Because
why is that?
Just because if anything that may cause an unsafe condition that would be more of a concern for the residents, there would be something electrical that may cause a fire. And a lot of older homes may have some electrical systems that was acceptable. And we talked about this earlier, acceptable at construction, but because it's changing standards, and we know more than what we did back then. Right?
You're talking about knob and tube.
Knob and tube, yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's there. It's working.
I mean, if it was built in 1910 and it's 2022.
Exactly.
I mean, it's been there for a long period of time.
It's still been working.
It doesn't mean that you said there aren't inherent risks or limitations to the system.
Sure.
So maybe you could expand on that. What are some of the limitations of like knob and tube?
Well, knob and tube itself, just the way that they ran the conductors and the components they're not, I guess, shielded conductors like they use today, like a Romex type. The components are, let's say, if it's up in the attic, they're mostly conductors running independent.
When you say Romex, what does that mean?
Romex is basically a manufactured name.
Okay.
It's a popular name brand.
Sort of
most
like
likely,
Kleenex?
Basically,
Okay,
yeah.
all
It's
right.
widely used throughout. It's non-metallic conductors, meaning the conductors, the wires inside is also encapsulated by a flexible PVC or other material versus a metallic, which is like a metal conduit of sort. Knob and tube basically is, for the most part, unprotected, where it connects to some of the components to continue the circuit. Also, many of the knob and tube, of course, because it's older, back then they use aluminum wiring.
Okay.
Aluminum wires are decent conductors. They're not great compared to what is used today as copper.
Okay.
Right? So they can't handle the load
Right.
as today's conductors could.
Yeah. So if they're running too much amperage through that, what ends up happening?
It could basically cause the wire to heat up. And sometimes what we'll see is when we go into an inspection, they still have some older circuits, older wiring, but then they put in bigger breakers. So it's now the breaker can handle the load, but the wiring can't. Right?
Interesting.
And vice versa.
Okay. Do you know off the top of your head, like what have you seen across the board on, 1,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet, 4,000 square feet? Like, what does it cost if you come up on inspection? Hey, there's knob and tube that are present and it's active. What are some of the costs to like have those rerun or redo?
I think it really depends on how many circuits are still left. Is it the whole house, right? Or
I know it's a hard answer.
it's a hard answer. I would say, because if you're going to change out a knob and tube, it really depends if the electrical panel are still fuses or has it been updated.
Okay.
If it's been updated and it's just the knob and tube wiring, then it's just running new wire, right?
Sure.
New conductors.
It's super labor intensive.
It is, because you'd have to potentially drill through walls, drill through headers, and all that stuff.
So here's my experience, and I'd love to get your input on this. Okay. So before I got my license, I was working with a architect for a while, helping rehab his historic house on the water here in Larchmont. Frank Hitch, if you remember who that is. And we went through, we rebuilt windows, redid the bay window, took off the old siding. We went from, took off the old aluminum siding, underneath that was cedar, and took it all the way down to the horizontal boards, put zip sheathing up, put up new wood siding. And one of the things we ended up doing was redoing some of the electrical. Now he was licensed and he had done it before, and so I was just learning. At first, I didn't even know what we were doing. He was cutting holes, and I don't know if you can see on camera, but he was cutting holes effectively at the bottom and the very top of because he had 3 floors, at the bottom and the top of every single room, and so we'd have to run it from one room to the next. And so what you end up doing is you run the wire up and you get it at the bottom of the floor, and you take it and you take this long kind of fiberglass pole and jam it up the wall through the insulation if there was insulation, and then you'd catch it at the top and run it through, and then you'd have to go use like these 90-degree drills if you wanted to put an outlet. And it's not necessarily the materials, not that materials haven't been really expensive over the last couple of years and have gone up, but it's very labor intensive, and especially if you're going to end up paying an electrician. From what I've seen is it can be as little as $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 for a couple of rooms or a smaller house, to $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, depending on the complexity and how many outlets and what actually has to be done. Do you feel like that's a decent description of how it's done and what the cost is?
Definitely. It's always labor intensive when you're trying to run through tight areas and you're trying to get new circuits, new power to places that, if it's an older home, probably the one that you did probably had balloon framing where the studs just went straight up to the second floor. Nowadays they don't do that, right?
Yeah, for the people at home, that typically that you build one floor at a time.
Yes.
That used to be they would put this entire wall up, and it would be these super long posts that they would do. It's called balloon framing.
All the way up to the second floor.
Yeah, and so it's easy to fish them up.
If you're going to be running new circuits, that's great because you don't have to drill through headers and all that, top plates. But yeah, very labor intensive.
Yeah.